The most versatile player in the game.
Is there anything he can't do?
He is the best player on the planet, period.
I'm one of them dudes you gon' have to get used to fearing. Cause just when y'all think my music nearing its peak, I dig deep and
Kevin, you play this game with a passion.
Kevin Garnett, right to the occasion.
It's been a year of first. The first time that the Timberwolves...
If you start to say that you can't learn or you can't get better, I think it's the day we start to tilt your hat to the crowd.
It's Kevin Garnett earlier tonight, who exudes so much emotion. He is the best player and he is their soul.
Talent, skill, a number of different things.
Oh, Kevin Garnett! What an incredible weak side block.
Garnett erases the shot to Serbiak, runs the floor, gets it back from Wally and finger rolls.
2003-2004 NBA MVP, Kevin Garnett.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Once Upon a Dribble. As usual, you have myself, Josh Medeiros, and my co-host Calvin Johnson. But today, for the first time in Once Upon a Dribble history, we have a guest, and we're psyched. It's resident T-Wolves expert, NBA history enthusiast, but you can find him on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, under Smart Takes. It's our friend, Jeremiah. How you doing, my man?
I am doing spectacular. I am here, man. Let's talk some Timberwolves.
Let's talk some Timberwolves. You know, if you go back like 5 to 10 years, 15 years, and you hear someone say that, you'd be like, nah, man, let's not talk some Timberwolves. But it's 2024, so of course we're going to talk some Timberwolves.
Yeah, the time we're recording this in number 1 in the West, and if you had to put money on it, I think they're going to hold on to that number 1 seed all the way until playoff time. It's looking really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. I think they slipped to 2 or 3 for a little bit there. That 4 is getting like super close. It's like a 1-game difference between 1 and 4. So I'm hoping they hang on to number 1. I think for playoff sake, I would love for them to hang on to number 1 for sure.
That'd be nice. Yeah, so we're recording this. Tonight's the last night of action before the All-Star break. Minnesota's a game ahead of OKC, game and a half ahead of the Clippers, and then 2.5 ahead of the Nuggets. The Nuggets have kind of been sliding a little bit lately. So, yeah, man, it's looking good. You guys have had some big wins. I know you've posted about this as well. I don't want to go too deep into the team, today's team right now, because we'll talk about that later. But aren't they they have one of the best records against teams above 500, right? They're like 20-something and 14 or 20-something 15. Like, they have a really good record.
Yeah, I think I checked post the Clippers game, and they had the best record against teams over 500. And they've only played Portland since then, but I don't know, maybe another.
Yeah. They're 24-11 right now.
Okay.
24-11, yeah, which is it's the second best in the league right now, and it's best in the West. So there you go, man. That's usually a good sign come playoff time. So
yeah,
there's a good sign.
Bad teams too, which is always actually
right.
As well.
I'll tell you this. I'm based out of Utah. I follow the Jazz. And there was a trade that kind of changed the direction of these two franchises, Minnesota and Utah. And I'm sure we'll touch on that later in the podcast here. But I've spent years on Twitter arguing with NBA fans about just how impactful Rudy Gobert is. And until you actually experience him on your team, until you actually watch him night in and night out, most people just do not understand the Stifle Tower, what he brings to an NBA team. So I'm on the side of the other end of that trade, where the Jazz are tumbling and collapsing right now. But I'm glad that you got to benefit from that trade. So I'm glad you got that good end of that.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the camp of I was never like a Rudy hater, so to speak, but like it's different watching him night to night. It's hard to appreciate how much he impacts a game until you're watching him night to night, possession to possession. He's otherworldly. He's different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And we got a good mix here. So yeah, Calvin's Jazz fan. You're a T-Wolves fan. I'm a Celtics fan. So we got a fun mix going on here. But I want to ask you, so with your Wolves fandom, tell us about how that started. You've just been watching them since you were young. Some of your favorite players growing up. What did that kind of look like for you?
Yeah. So I didn't really get into like the NBA until like 07, 08.
Okay.
So like KG's last year in Minnesota I actually went to a game and ended up getting his signature.
No way.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I was like one of those people that were like hanging over like the tunnel.
Yeah.
Hanging. All I had was this like folded up piece of notebook paper with some notes on it. And so I literally took the paper in it, just signed a random piece of paper. And
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. But yeah, that was like my first year like as an NBA fan. So unfortunately, I only saw KG in a Wolves uniform for like a year before the big trade. But
right.
That's when my Wolves fandom started. And then I would say like I became like a diehard fan probably my first year at college, which was 2014, because that's when I was like able to like watch every single game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And since then, it's been Wolves Nation.
Diehard.
It's been unfortunate until here.
It's awesome.
So, not to add salt to an open wound, but Minneapolis is the only city with a team in all four major sports, NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL, but not to have a championship this century since the year 2000.
It's crazy.
And I'm sorry, I share your pain. I'm a Utah Jazz fan. I've never had a championship, period. So at least, us Minnesota fans and us Utah fans can share in the misery a little bit.
Yeah, I think that what the Twins won in the 90s.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
they were really good.
Yeah, but otherwise,
but I mean, with that being said, we are an NBA history podcast, and we are going to take the NBA time machine back. Kind of look at the history of Minnesota, particularly through Jeremiah's eyes, having been a fan. And today we really want to take a look at Minnesota's first major success when they made it to the conference finals in 2004. But first, I kind of want to set the stage here, right? I mean, the Wolves are an expansion team in the 89-90 season. And, as expected, they were bad for quite a while. First 6 seasons, they win 22, 29, 15, 19, 20, and 21 games. That's all from 1990 to 95. The leading scorer is Tony Campbell. There's a name that very few, even NBA diehards, probably remember. And then they stumble into Christian Laettner, who never really becomes that guy, never becomes the dude that he was expected to be in college. Minnesota's stuck down in the cellar until fortune smiles upon them and they do draft KG. He was just the second high school prospect drafted in 20 years at that time. They pick him up at pick number 5. And by year number 2, it's playoffs. But before we get into prime KG, Jeremiah, tell us about, obviously you became a fan well after the fact, but I'm sure you've had a chance to look back. Just tell us about what KG meant to the franchise, kind of the phenom. What kind of prospect was he when he first became a Timberwolf?
Yeah, I mean, at that time in NBA history, like you mentioned, like high school kids coming straight to the league was kind of rare.
Yeah.
So I think he was the second one, like you mentioned, to come into the league straight from high school. So I think, especially considering the Wolves' history that first 5 or 6 years, he was just like maybe more beloved than you would think, but it was largely because it was like something to attach to. Like as a Wolves, like a new experience being a Wolves fan. Wolves only exist for like 5-6 years. They were terrible. And then you have this high school phenom who is projected to be this great player, but obviously he's a high schooler. But I think and it's still to this day, the attachment the Wolves have to KG in particular may, in my opinion, never be eclipsed just because of how much he means, especially to the early history of the Wolves. Like he is really a legend still in these parts around here.
Right. I mean, of course we'll get into this, but that's literally all you guys had from the time he was drafted until, obviously K-Love was awesome. You had Levine there for a little bit. Wiggins was exciting, but even then, and Ant's special. Everyone loves Anthony Edwards, but like, I think people do kind of forget what KG meant to you guys and how big of a deal he was, because this is a team that didn't really have anything going for them. And it's funny. So you look back at his rookie year, It's KG. The other guy to carry the scoring load is another throwback name for you, Tom Gugliotta. I've never seen that name pop up when I would throw in the NBA Live 02 disc into my GameCube back in the day, and that was one of the names that would pop up there. So yeah, KG. So he doesn't immediately leap to stardom like a lot of these like prep to pro prospects do, like LeBron, Dwight, like year one. You know, like KG had a respectable rookie year, but it's year two where he really explodes, and it helps because T-Wolves make a draft day trade in 1996 for Stephon Marbury. Stephon's out of Georgia Tech, and they make their first postseason. Obviously, that was a pairing there for a few years before Marbury moves on to other parts as well. But do you remember anything or have any comments like on the because the Marbury Garnett pairing was like the first real attempt to try and make something happen with KG, because Marbury did have at least some sort of I don't know, stardom to his name. I mean, solid guy back in the day, but obviously there's a lot of baggage with Marbury. So,
yeah, like you said, it was the Wolves' first real attempt to like become a team that was worth talking about.
Yeah.
KG's rookie year, I mean, he only started in half the games that the Wolves played that year.
It's crazy.
They won 26 games. He was averaging like 28, 29 minutes per game. And then it was year two, the same year they drafted Steph, that he becomes a full-time starter. The Wolves went basically 500. I think they won 40 games that year.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be like, you know, because they get drafted 1 year right after the other. So that was supposed to be at the time like, oh, this is the duo moving forward. This will be the duo years, etc. Unfortunately, Steph had, I don't know, different plans.
Yeah, so to say.
But they did have a lot of chemistry and success. I mean, KG still to this day talks about his friendship with Steph during those few seasons they played together. So,
yeah, and that wasn't just the only thing that they needed to be successful, right? It took some time to build. KG, by the way, was not even Rookie of the Year. That went to Damon Stoudemire, of all people. That's
crazy.
And KG, of course, was drafted 5. The guys drafted ahead of him have a combined 7 All-Star appearances. That's solid. 7 All-Star appearances amongst 4 guys. KG has 15. So it's safe to say that, Minnesota had the piece to completely change the franchise. But they needed more help, right, Jeremiah? And take it back to October 1997. Garnett and Minnesota agreed to a 6-year contract extension that was just unbelievable at the time. $126 million extension, which in those days was just unparalleled. Now, the contract's considered a risky move. Many analysts are speculating that it's going to make it impossible for the Wolves to sign new players or even keep their own. But KG, he lives up to it, right? He just gets exceptionally better with every subsequent season. But I want to take it to you, Jeremiah. What effect do you see, or do we see looking back, that KG's contract had on Minnesota's efforts to put a team around him?
I think, looking back, I mean, it's hard to say it had no effort, especially because the salary cap just wasn't, not only was it what it different today, but it was like, there were less people who knew how to be flexible around the salary cap, especially too. Yeah. So like, it's hard to say it had no effect. I think one of the things that helped the Wolves eventually, once they were able to kind of get some pieces, was KG is such a multifaceted player as far as like his skill set and what he's great at.
Yeah.
There's not, you don't have to have a specific kind of player. You don't have to plug in a specific type of guy who can do a specific type of thing. He's a guy who, in my opinion, is one of maybe the easier players to build around just from a team building, roster building perspective. And I think that once Minnesota kind of got their, kind of the Steph thing happened, I think he left or got traded in 99.
Yep.
Then 2000 happens. Wolves are great. They win 50 games, etc. End up going out in the first round. But then once they kind of made the moves that they made, we'll get to the 04 season. But the summer before that, they made a couple trades and got some people. And I think that kind of showed you that the salary cap problem was restrictive to a certain degree, but there was still definitely room to build around him just because of the kind of player he was.
I agree. I think he's one of the most portable players ever, because you see, I would never say that even at his peak that Garnett was like a tier 1 scorer in terms of like his offensive counters and the sort of like repertoire that he has compared to someone like a Dirk. But you know what KG did have is that he was an exceptional shooter. He didn't shoot at the rim as much as other bigs did, but he was still extremely efficient. And he was a guy that would frequently shoot short, long, mid-range jumpers. And you know, if he was drafted in 2015 instead of 1995, that would have easily extended a 3-point range, right? And great connective passer. I remember, of course, watching him in Boston. And even though he, you know, was on the wrong side of 30, he's still, and not averaging 20 points per game, the offense still flowed extremely well around him. And of course, goes without saying what he brings to the table on defense. But you kind of mentioned it. So after that first playoff appearance, the Wolves, they win 45 games. Then 1999, they go 500 in that lockout shortened year. Then they go 50, 47, 50, and 51 games. So great success, right? They clearly have something going, but they lose in the first round notoriously in each of those years. Some are closer than others. And, you know, ironically enough, when you think of KG, you think of an elite defender. The Wolves teams actually sport really good offenses relative to league average, and the defenses are a little more mediocre. But this culminates in 2002. So 2002, they have the number 4 offense in the league, but something is still off. So like you're kind of mentioning this already, you know, let's say you're in the GM chair. How are you fixing things? Like what kind of, you don't have to name specific players, but what are the archetype of players that you're maybe looking to kind of fix things? Because KG, you know, even without anchoring like a top 5 defense year in and year out, he's clearly someone eye test, you watch, and he's just like an animal, right? Yeah. But if you're in the GM's chair, what are you doing there?
Yeah, I think the Wolves' strategy at that time was they understood what kind of defender he was, and so he played around a lot of offensively slanted kind of players: Terrell Brandon, Latrell Sprewell, Sam Cassell.
Terrell Brandon, it's a good name.
Yeah,
there you go.
Like, more offensively slanted kind of. I think that ultimately, and having Flip, who I think was ahead of his time offensively, conceptually, as far as like the kind of sets that Minnesota would run, the kind of shots they were getting, I think I would have went the other direction. I probably, especially because at the time, so the first thing you have to do is put a ball handler next to him. Like if you understand KG's game, he is not like a self-creator.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to come from pick and pops. It's going to come from maybe ISO post-ups. Is about as much self-creation as you're going to get out of him. So you want a primary ball handler. Preferably that guy is also a scorer at some level as well. I think he needed to play I would have loved to see him play next to a real defensive 5. A lot of the 5s that Minnesota was putting around him at the time were more like slow-footed, offensive, post-up kind of guys. I think maybe the thought process was to take advantage of KG as a passer.
Yeah.
But I think moving him to the 4 and having him be like a guy who could truly roam a lot more, especially on defense, would have maybe even unlocked a level of defense that he couldn't show consistently just because of how much ground he's having to cover. But at the time, like you said, the offenses weren't really the issue. Like the Wolves were consistently a pretty decent offense. I think they were top 5 at some times, right around the top 10, 11, 12. But again, they leaned so heavily on KG defensively that I think that ultimately ended up being the downfall of a lot of those years where they were winning 50 games. They were winning 45 games, 47 games, etc. He carry way too much. So I think a primary ball handler, I think I want a 5 who is a much better rim protector, unlock KG's versatility a little more defensively. And then, otherwise I'm going to probably 3-and-D kind of players, space the floor. I feel like the lack of being able to get a playmaker next to him would probably be thing number 1 that I would change.
So you're telling us that Mark Madsen and Michael Olowokandi aren't the ideal fives next to KG? Those aren't the running mates you want with them?
Close hot take.
Yeah.
And I mean, hindsight's 2020. I agree with everything you just said. And if I were GM, I would have been right there with you. But what they actually do in the sacred timeline here, in the actual timeline, is you kind of touched on it already. They make that deal in June of 2003 to bring in Sam Cassell. He's a seasoned champ. He's been around the block moving a time or two. But they're not done. Then in July, they make just a splashy blockbuster deal that lands them the talented yet volatile swingman Latrell Sprewell. Josh and I recently did an episode on the 99 Knicks, and we covered Sprewell's knuckleheadedness ad nauseum. But we also talked about just how great he was as a player. He doesn't get enough credit for how good he was, in my opinion. So Cassell, Sprewell, both talented pieces, but both are well past 30 years old, even at this time. How do you feel about those two players? What do you remember about them and that potential fit with KG?
At the time, I felt like it was very clear that the Wolves had knew that it was time to make a win now move. I think 2000 is, to me, KG's first year of superstar, top 5-ish player. I think he finished second in MVP that year. And then they go 3 seasons in a row where they're winning 50-ish games and going out in the first round. And I just think that at that time, the front office was like, okay, we got to make some moves to win right now. We understand Kevin Garnett's one of the best players in basketball. It's probably not a good idea to waste his prime. So from that perspective, I understand why, they went Cassell, why they went Sprewell, why they went older guys who were established and had already established, their level as players. Maybe not necessarily the two deals or trades that I would have made, but it's kind of hard to argue with the results. I mean, Minnesota kind of takes off that year. They get to 50 wins for the first time in franchise history. The offense is humming. The defense is good enough. I think Flip coached a great year that year. Sprewell was really good in his role. Cassell was maybe the second most valuable player on the whole team that year. So I think from that perspective, it might be hard to argue that those moves were bad. I mean, obviously, hindsight's always 20, But I don't know. Looking back, I think I understand it. Would it have been what I would have done? Maybe not. But it's hard to argue with the results. And, we'll probably get to it. But if a certain injury doesn't happen, maybe we're having a different conversation about that.
So, yeah, that's fair enough.
We'll definitely get to that get to that injury because that's a big deal. But I'm just now realizing this. So KG rips off this stretch from 2000 to 2004, where he is top 5 in MVP voting 4 of those 5 years, and 3 of those 5 he's either second or he just wins it outright, which he does in 2004. So for what is that, 5 straight seasons where he's first team All NBA. He's easily top 5 guy year in and year out. So, so talking about this 04 season, like you said, they win 58 games. They even threatened 60 there for a little bit. So I'm looking at the standings by date. Kind of get off to I wouldn't say slow start because they're still competitive, but they don't actually get to second place in the conference until mid-January, which at that point, they rip off this big run. They even have first place for a little bit late January. And then Sacramento kind of fends them off for a little bit before at the very end, they make one last push and then they do get that 1 seed. They finish ahead of San Antonio by 1 game. They finish ahead of the Lakers by 2 games. So yeah, like you said, the offense. So they have a top 6 offense and defense that year. Sam Cassell's second team All NBA, which is crazy. And so just for those listening, here's a little bit on their depth chart. So you had Sam Cassell there. Troy Hudson's backing him up. Troy Hudson was actually starting before Cassell got there. At the 2, you had Trenton Hassel and sharpshooter Fred Hoiberg splitting time at the 2. Like we said, we got Spree, Wally Szczerbiak's backing him up before Szczerbiak kind of breaks out as a more starter, prominent guy in the seasons to follow. And after KG, you have this hodgepodge of bigs, like I mentioned, Mark Madsen, you got Gary Trent, and then you have that former number 1 overall pick, the Candyman, Michael Olowokandi. So you mentioned some things that maybe you would have done differently. Obviously, in hindsight, everything's 2020. Aside from those main pieces that we've already kind of touched on, is there anything else that you like about this roster that kind of stood out from that year? I mean, you have some shooting there, which is, probably, it's obviously a big reason why the offense was always so good, but anything else that you particularly, actually like that you want to pull out?
I would say that the thing I probably liked most was what you mentioned, the shooting. I mean, yeah, Hoiberg was there. Wally was coming into his own. I mentioned the flip system earlier, which I thought was a little ahead of its time and allowed for much better spacing than a lot of teams had at that particular time too. Kevin Garnett, obviously himself, was a very underrated shooter in my opinion, especially from the mid-range. So
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that, throughout these years from 2000 to 2004, they're threatening top 5 offenses a lot of that time. And I think a big reason for that was clearly an emphasis on the front office. And you can see that with a lot of the roster moves they made in that span.
Sure.
And I guess that kind of brings us right where we need to be. We wanted to talk about most in this episode. Everything that happened to this team in the playoffs. You alluded to it a moment ago that up until this season, they're always winning 50-something games in the regular season, and then always finding themselves on the losing end, generally in the first round. So this season's going to be different. We have the playoffs come, and the Wolves handle Denver. KG had 26, 15, and 7 on the series. Spree and Cassell each average 20 apiece themselves. And this all sets up a date with Sacramento in round 2, which, we don't talk about this series enough. This is actually a truly all-time series in retrospect. The Kings are just 2 years removed from that infamous series versus LA. And they're trying to squeeze what juice they have left from their aging crew. There's only 2 games that are decided by double digits. The other 5 are decided by 6 points or less, and including Game 3 being a 1-point game and Game 7 being a 3-point game. But this series is a true because KG has to contend with Weber, Divock, Brad Miller, but they pull it out, and Game 7 is truly an all-timer. Like I said, we don't talk about this series nearly enough. In Game 7, KG drops 32 points, 21 rebounds. On top of that, give him 5 blocks and 4 steals. What does that kind of performance do for a guy like KG as far as building momentum, building legacy, whatever it may be? Talk about what that meant for Minnesota and for KG specifically.
I think up until that point, and maybe just in his Minnesota tenure in general, it was the biggest game of his career.
For sure.
Up until then, they'd had plenty of first-round exits, and he kind of got a moniker of great regular season player who cannot perform when it matters.
Yeah.
It's a Game 7. That's about as high pressure. They were the 1 seed that year. Everybody expected them to make a run. They're in round 2. And then I think in that game, he played 46 of the 48 minutes. Like you said, 32, 21, and 5 blocks. And I've rewatched that whole game a couple times.
That's awesome.
He's just, to me, in my opinion, as a guy who has watched a bunch of big historical performances, just as far as an individual carry job, that's about as good as it really gets. He was doing absolutely everything for Minnesota, was everything for Minnesota. Like I said, I would argue in his whole Wolves tenure, it was the biggest game he ever played.
For sure. I agree with you. And it's cool to look back on those sorts of legacy defining games. I watched that game, I want to say last summer for the first time completely through, not just highlights, not just looking at the box score. And it kind of reminded me, obviously different context, different career circumstances, but in terms of like, I am that guy, stop talking about me this way. It reminded me of LeBron's Game 6 versus the Celtics in 2012, the 45-15. Even though LeBron had some playoff success beforehand, but hadn't won the title yet, still had kind of the Boston monkey on his back. And in terms of that sort of like talking about this player, there's before this game and then there's after this game, and there's two kind of different times of talking about him. And that game's awesome. I mean, it really is one of the best back against your wall, like do you have it or do you not have it kind of games. And as cliche as it is to talk about a player's performance that way, I mean, it's true. I mean, it kind of really does boil down to that. So it sets up a date with the Lakers, right? And so they lose in 6 games, but it's a pretty tight series. So the Lakers are on the back end of their run. They're running on fumes. 03 and 04 are especially contentious for Shaq and Kobe, and that could obviously fill probably like 3 or 4 podcast episodes on their own. But this is the team that has Malone, they have Peyton, and they're making one last ditch run to the finals, which I think even if they won in 04, I think things were kind of coming to a head anyways between those two guys. But the series is a tough loss for the Wolves because they have home court. They almost force a Game 7. They lose 96-90 on May 31st, 2004 at the Staples Center. KG has a really good series, actually. He averages 24 and 14, shoots 46%. Spree averages about 21 a game, but he's pretty inefficient. He hovers around 40% on the series. But this all swings on a big what if that we kind of alluded to earlier. So I'll set this up and let you kind of go off on this. But Sam Cassell gets hurt, only plays 4 games, only starts 3 of those 4. Flip Saunders, of course, is the coach at the time, and he has to watch in frustration as one of Sam Cassell's finest seasons as a professional ends with this hip problem, which possibly comes from his infamous big ball celebration that he does. And I was like, no way. So this basically forces Fred Hoiberg, and even at times you go back and watch highlights, Kevin Garnett to walk the ball past half court and initiate offense for the Lakers against the Lakers. So Flip back in 2014 says, quote, "We lost the championship by that. When Cassell did that, he had an avulsion fracture in his hip. So from that perspective, I've always been against that type of thing," referring to the celebration. So firstly, give us your thoughts on the matchup versus the Lakers from like a roster to roster standpoint, X's and O's, because obviously the Shaq Kobe run is one of the most well known in league history. And then what do you think happens if Sam doesn't whip out that celebration? Or I mean, it's he had the hip problems before then, but is aggravated by that. So I'll let you go off.
Okay, let's start with the series. Again, if you're unfamiliar with that time period, it's a series that's a great watch in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's a lot closer than you might think it was.
Definitely,
I think it was. I think from a talent perspective, the Lakers had the clear edge, but I don't know. The Wolves just they stuck around. They hung in the whole series. I think it's one of KG's better playoff series in his career, period.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately,
we're bringing up a lot of painful memories here, Josh. Look at this man. We are pushing to relive.
If I remember correctly, he heard it at the end of the King series, and then went into the LA series kind of hampered. He didn't even play the last 2 games of that series, of the LA series.
Mm-hmm.
And he was hampered the 4 games that he did play, and it just wasn't as effective as he normally.
He didn't play well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to agree with Flip, especially considering it. And it's not necessarily that, Shaq and Kobe and that Lakers team weren't very good or whatever. When healthy, they were arguably the best team in the league. I just think that they were having some on-court things that were kind of maybe stopping them from reaching their ceiling at that time. The roster outside of those 4 was kind of for LA. And I think the Wolves had kind of just winning back-to-back, because I think they went to 7 in the first round versus Denver as well. Winning those kinds of series back-to-back, I think there's a conception that kind of drags down your energy and that makes you more likely to lose. But I think that those kinds of things in a lot of ways can be inspiring.
Yeah.
Can be like things that like, okay, you know, you win 2 Game 7s in a row, you might start thinking this is destiny. You know what I mean? Like you just might start getting the faith in yourself, and it feels like kind of the faith and the inspiration that the Wolves were playing with. So in my opinion, you get a healthy Sam Cassell the whole series, I like our chances. Just all things considered, the Lakers roster issues, the Lakers, you know, on-court emotional issues, whatever have it. The fact that it just felt like the Wolves were just on this kind of run of destiny, so to speak. KG was having the best year of his career. There were a lot of moments during that series, and again, I urge anybody to watch it, where Kevin Garnett looked like the clear best player on the floor for a lot of stretches of that series. So it's probably the Wolves fan in me a little bit, but healthy Sam Cassell, I like our chances.
Yeah. Before I tee it off to Calvin for an interesting what if question, I want to note, so Cassell during the regular season is playing pretty much about 35 minutes a game or close to. Let's see, exactly 35. In the playoffs, he's doing about the same, and then in the conference finals, playing hurt, he only manages 16 minutes a game and not even 10 points a game. And it is a vulnerable Lakers team. So Kobe averages 24 a game on 41% shooting. Only shoots 75% from the line. So it's not even like a great Kobe series by any means. Shaq averages only 21 points a game. He's super efficient, but Kobe shoots like 50 times more than he does over the course of the series. And then, Malone has an all right series. Fisher's there. But yeah, it's a pretty vulnerable Lakers team. And it makes sense why, in retrospect, the Lakers get handled by Detroit. But, this is 100% winnable. So.
Yeah, and one thing we love to do on this podcast is the big what if. Any longtime listeners here, via Spotify, Apple, YouTube, however you've been following the podcast, Josh and I ask the what if question at least once, probably almost every episode. So with that being said, let's talk about that big what if. Sam Cassell plays his regular allotment of minutes, doesn't get injured. That doesn't mess up all of the rotations, doesn't mess up all of the lineups. Minnesota beats LA, which I think they, like you said, they had every right to do so if they were healthy. What happens in those hypothetical NBA Finals matchup? Minnesota versus Detroit. We can even say maybe even Indiana versus Minnesota if the Pacers had managed. But let's keep for now the what if hypothetical series: Detroit versus Minnesota for the Larry O'Brien Trophy. How does that play out in your mind?
I want to say it's a 6 or 7 game series. I think a lot of the problems that the Lakers had that kind of kept them from beating Detroit were about the Shaq and Kobe feud. That kind of, Kobe was trying to take more of the mantle. He was, necessarily taking a bunch of shots that weren't necessarily the best for the offense, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that ended up feeding Detroit's belief that they could beat that team. And I think, I don't know, it's hard to say. 6 or 7 game series. How well does KG play in that series matched up against Ben? That's probably a big factor. How well does Sprewell, or the combination of maybe Sprewell and Zerbiak, play versus like Rip? Sam versus Chauncey. That would have been, I think it would have been a great matchup. I wanted to check, I didn't get a chance to, about the Wolves matchups in the regular season versus that Piston team, but on paper, it was a very evenly matchups. Again, the KG versus Ben, the Chauncey versus Sam, the Latrell and Zerbiak or Latrell and Hoiberg versus Rip would have probably been what tilted the series. I would have been rooting for the Wolves. I would have liked chances. I don't want to go out and out say that they would win the series, but I would have liked their chances because I think what helped the Pistons win against the Lakers were problems that the Wolves weren't dealing with. And like I said, you're on a run of destiny. If you win 2 Game 7s in a row, and then you go on and beat the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, what kind of confidence are you walking into that arena with?
For sure.
Versus the Pistons.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, you got it. Your head's, you can barely wear a hat. I mean, like, you're walking in with a totally different level of confidence. So I would have liked the Wolves' chances. It would have been absolutely fantastic to see. For sure.
And I got that pulled for you as you were talking. The regular season series, Minnesota went 2-0, winning by 3 points and 1 point. So suffice to say, a healthy Minnesota, a healthy Detroit. That's a 7-game series. That's one of the series that we still remember as one of the all-time greats. And to your point, I do think Minnesota wins that series if they're healthy.
And I think what also helps is that the Pistons team, obviously, now we look back in retrospect very fondly on the 04 Pistons because they sustain that run. They make a few more, they make it back in 05, lose to the Spurs, make a few more conference finals. But at that point in time, it's not like the Pistons were like this inevitable juggernaut that like the 90s Bulls were, or the 2010s Warriors were, or even the 2000s Lakers. I think that if you're the T-Wolves and you beat that team, that feels inevitable, like those Lakers, where even though everything fell apart and it still worked out for them, the Pistons weren't necessarily that team. So it would definitely feel like, hey, these are 2 teams that haven't been on the stage yet, and like let's just play it out and see who's able to make it happen. Yeah, like Calvin said, in the regular, you can't put a ton of stock in regular season matchups at time, but I think it is pretty telling that the 2 matchups were like 1 possession games. So that's crazy. So it stinks because, things go south quick, and despite the optimism for the team heading into 05, they're expected to be contenders again. I had their over under total heading into, so heading to 2005, their over under win total for preseason odds, they're pegged at 55.5. So, I mean, they're expected to be contenders again, but they go 44-38. Flip only makes it a little over halfway through the season before Kevin McHale comes in. They play a little bit better under McHale. They finished the season 19-12 under the old Celtic, but don't qualify for the playoffs. And then they only win 33 games in 06 and then 32 in 2007. And then we all know what happens next. So what do you think went wrong in the ensuing seasons? Because in the first half of the decade, they were able to sustain these 50-win seasons. And all of a sudden, after 04, it just completely falls apart.
Yeah, I think some of it was KG and age starting to show. It's a little harder to carry certain kinds of rosters when you're a certain age. I think some of it was what we talked about earlier when the Wolves made those moves. They were win-now moves. I mean, both Cassell and Sprewell were in their 30s, and I think those were that 04 year for both of them was the best year either one ever played in a Wolves uniform.
Yeah.
And I think that summer Sprewell famously turned down like a $20 deal because he couldn't be.
The famous quote, "I've got children to feed."
Said he couldn't feed his family and then never played in the league again. That's
oh
great.
My gosh, man.
So he turns down the deal. Flip. They don't start very good at all.
Yeah.
Flip fired halfway through the year. McHale comes in trying to right the ship. They're a little better, but not much better.
Yeah.
06, 07 injuries start to get to KG a little bit, and they had the Smith thing where they got their draft picks taken. Don't even talk to me about that. Anyway, long story short, I think the win now moves that they made, those players' time just kind of came. I think it was a mix of that. KG's age kind of came. I think the NBA in general was starting to catch up offensively. Like I said, I think the Wolves had an advantage having Flip from, say, 2000 to 2004-ish offensively, like conceptually, the kind of things that they were running. But 06, 07, the league in general starts to kind of catch up to a lot of those kind of concepts. So I think it was just like a freight train of like 3 or 4 different things kind of all happening at once. And then, like you said, they didn't make the playoffs again. They 04. They go to the Western Conference Finals, and then it's missed the playoffs, straight KG.
Yeah. I think an underrated part of what we're talking about is the load that was placed on him. So from 2000, so after the lockout year, from 2000 to 2004, KG plays 81, 81, 82, 82 games and is averaging 40 minutes a night for 5 straight years. And I think that, even though he had comparable, playing time, I mean, he still played a lot in 05, 06, and 07. But he starts to miss some games where he hadn't before, and the production pretty clearly tails off on a permanent basis. And it's not because he's a worse player. I just think that catches, because at that point after 04, he's starting to approach 30 pretty quickly, and that's when you should. I mean, 04 is definitively his prime. He's 27 years old, MVP, and then from there, I mean, and it eventually caught up to him in 2009 when he had that season-ending injury against remember, it was in Utah against the Jazz. The Celtics were 09, they were arguably better than they were in 08, and then he gets hurt on an alley-oop against the Jazz in Utah, and then from there, he's still effective, but he's, not the same anymore, even though he was only 32 in 2009. So there it is.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that last playoff victory for Minnesota was over Sacramento, because we got two franchises that over the next, for many years thereafter, would have difficulty, to say the least. In the case of Minnesota, it was obviously a lot of questionable draft decisions, most notably having not one but 2 opportunities to draft Steph Curry. And, things just don't really right themselves for a long time. They put pieces around guys like Kevin Love until 2018 when they land Jimmy Butler for essentially winter season. They make the playoffs, but they don't win a series. And that kind of leads us to right now. And I want to get your take on this year's Minnesota Timberwolves. My question is, with guys like, obviously, Ant, Cat, Rudy, Naz Reid, Conley, is this the best Minnesota team since that 2004 squad? And how bullish are you on their chances to be the first Minnesota team to win a series and potentially a title since that time?
The first question, is this the best team since 04? I think it is by far the best team.
Yeah.
I don't really think that's even a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The 2018 team, especially before Jimmy got injured in March, they were
a big deal.
Yeah, they were really good.
They were on pace to do something special.
They were top. I want to say they were top 4 or 5 team. I think they were pacing to be a home court team before.
As Jimmy would say, you need me. You need me.
It was true.
Yeah.
They were. I want to say they were. Yeah, they were like a 4 or 5. Was it a meniscus injury for Jimmy? I know it was his knee, right? Okay.
Yep. So I would say that's the only other team that you can even put in the conversation. But I think this team is just way better than that team.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different player. I think Rudy's been the best defender in basketball. Ant's coming along towards superstardom, not quite there yet, all-star level player. As far as my belief in them to win a title, I think it's been pretty wavy this year. I think first 25 games, I was like, am I going to witness a Wolves championship? And then they went through the slog in late December through like mid-January where they legitimately looked like this team might get beat in the first round kind of team. Mm-hmm. And then I think they've kind of gotten their mojo back. I would say these last 2 weeks is probably the best I felt about them in general. They've been a historically great defense pretty much since opening night. They've been clearly the best defense in the league, but historically, like since I think since 2000, they're like a top 6 defense that we've seen since then. So they're like in that stratosphere of team, like the 2020 Bucks, the 2016 Spurs are in that conversation of like the best defenses we've seen in modern history. The 22 Celtics arguably in that conversation, like the best that we've seen. But my issue and my concern has always been about their offense, especially in the half court. But lately,
it's been better.
It's been, in my opinion, a lot better. the Wolves in general, I think they've been hovering around league average offensively, like 14, 15, 16, 17 all year. But they've been in near the top 5 in effective field goal percentage. They're one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league. Assist percentage, they've been in like the top 11, top 12 most of the year. 2 areas have really been like absolutely dragging down their offense. That's turnovers and their shot selection, not necessarily bad shot, but it's not modern enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have it here. Currently, they are first in 3-point percentage, 7th in effective field goal percentage, like I was saying. Free throw rates, they're top 10. But they're 27th in turnover percentage and 23rd in 3-point attempts per 100.
Yeah.
And that's really, in my opinion, what's been dragging their offensive rating, especially in the half court down. The last couple of weeks, though, they're up to 13th in turnover percentage instead of 27th. That's a big jump. And they're up to 12th in 3-point attempts per 100 versus 23rd. And I think over the past 2 weeks, they're 3rd in offensive rating. So what I would say that what I'm optimistic about as far as their title chances, because to me it's all about their offense. I'm not concerned about their defense translating to playoffs very much. What gives me optimism is that their issues are not roster problems. They're like procedural problems, like taking care of the basketball. Okay. Why they made the Monte Morris trade, which I really liked. Yeah. And then just the modernizing of the offense. And post-game, these last couple weeks, I think the Minnesota beat reporters, Minnesota local reporters are some of the best in the country, and they do a good job about like asking the Wolves and their players about their issues. And a lot of the players, Ann has talked about this, Chris Finch has talked about this, Rudy has talked about this, about how there's been an emphasis, we need to take more threes. We need to take more threes, etc. Mm-hmm. And last couple weeks, they've been doing that. If this keeps up, I might have to make some outlandish takes. I might have to.
I love it, man.
I want to see it for longer than a couple weeks, obviously. Longer than at like 2-3 weeks they've been playing this way. I want to see it for a little bit longer than this. We'll see how they come out after the All-Star break. But if we make it to mid-March and they're putting together a month and a half of this kind of basketball, I might have
to start
saying
saying stuff.
Yeah, I might have to start saying a few things people won't like.
I love it. No, last few weeks, so you had winning the Clippers against the Bucks, the Thunder, all on the road. This is within the last like 2.5 weeks. Actually blew out the Mavericks. And I mean, even that Bulls game you guys lost in overtime a little bit ago, that was a game that should have been a win. But it's so I'm looking at the playoff probabilities report. So you guys are pacing for 57 to 58 wins, which is where you should finish. But the nice thing is that as far as remaining strength of schedule, in the West, you have the 3rd easiest. I think you've weathered the storm as far as the tough part of your calendar goes. And as far as inside track for the 1 seed, yeah, at least per Basketball Reference, 57.5% chance to get the 1 seed. So,
yeah, I know your Twitter name is Smart Takes, so I can understand you not wanting to throw out some really, really bold predictions just yet. But your guy Mike Conley was willing to throw it down earlier this week, saying, quote, "I think Rudy Gobert is not treated like a superstar because he doesn't do the superstar things offensively that LeBron and Steph do, but he has the same impact on a game. People game plan for Rudy like they game plan for these other guys." So
Conley,
the magic's there. You may just have to drop that hot take. You may have to get on that Conley train and say it like it is.
Man,
I don't know if I put him up there with superstar, but I do think that he doesn't necessarily get the respect of the caliber of player he is. Like, if we're talking just impact wise, he really is like a top 10-ish kind of player just from. And I think it's funny because one thing I've loved to watch more than in recent history this year is like opposing coaches talking about the Wolves, like pregame and postgame. And like every coach, especially pregame, it's spending half their time talking about the defense, half their time talking about Rudy and how they're going to scheme and how they got to make sure they do certain things. And then post game, I shared it on Twitter the other day. Doc, after the Bucks game, was talking about Rudy and talking about the Wolves and how the defense has come a long way and how they're much different, much better on that end than they were last year, and like the problems of like scheming against a Rudy Gobert and that kind of player. So I really think you could argue from a coach's perspective, there's nearly as many thoughts and adjustments and, okay, we got to switch up this scheme. We got to switch up how we do this when you're playing against a Rudy Gobert. I don't know if I'd put him on like a superstar impact.
For the record, I don't know if I could either, but I had to get your take on that.
Yeah. Mike maybe had a little bit too much dip on his chip there, but
I love it.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, got to get that 7-layer dip. You got to dig deep to get all the good stuff.
Yeah, that's for sure. He's just caping for his guy.
I know. Him and Gobert have the history. So I want to pull up. So with the crazy thing is, just one more thing before we sign off here. I think it's cool to see Ant as like a true two-way guy, and I think for any guy to kind of ascend to that superstar status, which I wouldn't say Ant's quite there yet, but I think he's pretty clearly on the trajectory and is probably like maybe like a season away from like really like exploding. Is that I'll watch these tight games where he will take on the toughest defensive assignment, and he'll be. I mean, it happened so this happened at Portland last night. They're ahead by like 19. Ant has 41, right? He scores. He's like really feeling it. He's scowling. He's like mean mugging the Trailblazers of all teams, and he's running back on defense and he's mean mugging them as they're bringing the ball up court. And I think Ant has like, I don't know if he'll ever. It's kind of tough to be all defense nowadays, but I mean, Ant's like really good. So Conley, Gobert, and Ant in non-garbage time minutes, they've 850 minutes together on the floor, and they're a plus 13.2 net rating and a 108 defensive rating. Which is it's like 7 to 8 points better than league average. Yeah, man. And then you got Cat. I think it's cool to see Cat kind of slide into a secondary scoring role. His efficiency's still there. You kind of worried maybe heading into the year about him finally handing the reins over of being a number one guy to Ant. But I think Cat's really slid into that pretty exceptionally. And he's one of the most efficient scorers in the league on a per shot basis. So yeah, something brewing over there, man.
Yeah, I think his kind of assimilation to his role is, maybe the most underrated piece of like, why is this team so good?
So good. Yep, definitely.
Yeah, on both ends.
I agree with that.
His willingness on the offensive end, he's getting less touches, he's getting less post-ups, he's having to sit in the corner a little bit more, he's doing a little bit more DHO kind of things. He's not playing the 5, obviously, much at all. And defensively, he's having to play 4 roles. He's having to switch more. He's having to fight over screens. He's having to play at the level a lot more. And he's a big part of why this, the glue is working. And as far as Ant and superstardom, I mean, yeah, like you said, I think he's a year or two away. I think he's made some really strong improvements, especially as a playmaker this year. Hopefully those come to bear come playoffs, but not quite at that level, but clearly there. And I don't know. I said, I think it was like 5 games into the year, and this is a hot take at the time, but I called the Wolves contenders. This is like 5 games into the year, and I don't know. I would just like to be vindicated for that.
Yeah.
So you put your take out there. Before we sign off, tell our listeners and our viewers how they can find you on the socials.
Yeah, absolutely. On Twitter, X, whatever you call it, _smart takes _ I have a TikTok as well. I have a link tree in my Twitter bio that's got like my TikTok, my Instagram, my Twitter. I'm starting a podcast soon. To that. I am everywhere, man. I'm everywhere.
He's man. Yeah, I gotta say he's like I said, definitely one of my favorite followers, man. I love seeing your takes, whether it's something that makes me laugh or something where I'm like, man, that was a good take. And the thing is, I think the reason we want to have you on, I definitely find myself agreeing with you more often than not. So I think we see the game in a similar way, and I was like, man, this is This is great. And, it, like I said, coincides with this awesome Wolves season. So, we'll be keeping an eye on that. Got OKC right there. Of course, the reigning champs right there. You got the Clippers humming. And then, hey, man, we'll see. Maybe come June, we'll have you back on and we'll talk about Boston, Minnesota finals and go back and forth on that. And then maybe, Calvin can give us some takes on what the Jazz need to do.
I'll just give you a take on the draft lottery. So I'll be doing draft lottery takes for the next few years.
Boston, Minnesota would low-key be a great finals. I don't know if the basketball guys are watching, but we would like that.
Man, I mean, that would feed families for sure. I need to see something like that. Dude, that overtime game, the last thing I'll say, that overtime game from a few weeks ago, where the Wolves didn't even have all their guys, and like everything's on Ant in that game. And he's kind of wore out towards the end, but he was like guarding Tatum. Tatum was kind of guarding him. Ant was like canning threes, and I'm like, dude, I can't do 2 weeks of this if this is going to happen in June. I just can't do it, man. So.
If the Wolves ever made a finals, I could do every second of it. I don't care if they get.
I love it. Love it, man. Well, we'll plug all your stuff in the description of the episode on Spotify and on YouTube as well. And keep your guys' eyes peeled for more stuff we'll be pumping out. Calvin and I have a lot planned for 2024. So subscribe to us there. Leave us a rate, comment, give us some feedback and stuff that you guys want to hear on ensuing episodes. But until next time, this is Josh, Calvin, and Jeremiah with Once Upon a Dribble signing out.